The ground trembles beneath the hooves of 1,000 horses and the clash of ancient steel. This is not the Britain of fairy tales, but a land of untamed forests and a queen who dared to defy an empire. Her name was Boudica, and her rebellion is one of history's most explosive uprisings. By the end of this journey, you will understand the true story of how a betrayed widow nearly shattered the world's greatest superpower. We will uncover the mysteries of a lost battlefield and separate the real warrior queen from the legend. What does true defiance look like to you? East Anglia was a world of whispering reeds and wide, open skies. This was the heartland of the Iceni people, a tribe whose name may have meant the horse people, a fitting title for a culture that revered these powerful animals. Their society was a tapestry of chieftains and warriors, woven together by bonds of loyalty and honor. Yet within this hierarchical structure, women held a status that would have stunned the Romans watching from across the Channel. A Celtic woman could own property, choose her own husband, and even train as a warrior. Their spiritual life was guided by the Druids, the philosophers and judges of their world, who saw the divine in every ancient oak and bubbling spring. Life centered around massive hill forts, earthen ramparts that crown the landscape, protecting sprawling settlements of roundhouses with conical thatched roofs. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from a central hearth, the social heart of the family. Their wealth was not in gold, though they had it, but in the land itself. They were farmers and herders, their economy built on the rich soil and the trade of grain, livestock, and beautifully crafted metalwork. This was a complete, complex world, a civilization with its own rules and rhythms, utterly unaware that a storm was gathering that would test every single one of its traditions to the breaking point. The world of the Iceni was about to be rewritten by the tread of a legionary's boot. In the year 43, the Roman war machine under the ambitious Emperor Claudius landed on Britain's shores. This was not a mere raid, it was a full-scale invasion, a calculated act of imperial expansion. Claudius, a man desperate for military glory to secure his own shaky political position, saw the mysterious island as the perfect prize. Rome's motivations were a potent mix of greed and strategy. Britain was rumored to be rich in metals, especially the tin vital for bronze, and its people were a potential source of countless slaves. Conquering it would bring immense prestige and secure the empire's northwestern flank. The legions moved with terrifying efficiency. They were a professional army, a stark contrast to the individualistic warriors of the tribes. They built fortified camps each night, advanced in disciplined formations, and used sophisticated artillery to smash through defensive positions. Their strategy extended far beyond the battlefield. The Romans were masters of political warfare. They identified powerful tribes and offered them a deal, a so-called alliance. These tribes became client kingdoms. In exchange for their loyalty and peace, they were allowed to keep their local rulers and a semblance of independence, all under the watchful eye of Rome. This was a clever way to pacify a large region without stationing a legion in every valley. The Iceni, under their king Prasutagus, initially chose the path of pragmatism over feudal resistance. They accepted this client status. For a time, it might have seemed like a reasonable arrangement. They could maintain their way of life, their leadership, and avoid the horrific destruction that had befallen other tribes who resisted. But this alliance was a fragile illusion. It was a peace dictated by the overwhelming power of a foreign empire, a giant allowing a local chieftain to rule only so long as it served the giant's own interests. The Iceni were living next to a sleeping dragon, and the question was not if, but when, it would finally wake up and show its true nature. The peace bought by this alliance had a name, and it was Prasutagus. As king of the Iceni, he walked a political tightrope every single day. His official title was Client King, a position that sounds powerful but was fundamentally fragile. He was allowed to rule his people, collect taxes, and administer local justice, but he answered to a Roman governor hundreds of miles away. The benefits of this arrangement were immediate and tangible. His tribe was spared the brutal warfare that had crushed their neighbors. Trade with the empire likely brought new goods and some measure of prosperity. For Prasutagus, this was not necessarily betrayal, but the ultimate act of pragmatism. He was trying to navigate an impossible situation, preserving his culture and his people by bending to a force he could not possibly break. But what is the true cost of such a peace? The danger was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. His authority was an illusion granted by Rome, and it could be revoked in an instant if he ever stepped out of line, or if a new Roman official decided the old agreement was no longer convenient. This system relied entirely on the goodwill of an empire not known for its generosity. Then the linchpin of this entire precarious arrangement vanished. Prasutagus died. In a move that was both calculated and utterly naive, he drafted a will designed to secure his family's future. He named his two young daughters as his primary heirs, but in a stunning concession, he also named the Roman Emperor Nero as a co-heir to his kingdom. His thinking was likely straightforward. By giving the emperor a share, he hoped to flatter Rome and secure its protection for his wife, Boudica, and their children. He was trying to use the empire's own laws to shield his family from its greed. It was a desperate gamble, a final attempt to control a future he would not live to see. He could never have predicted how catastrophically this plan would fail. The gamble of a dead king meant nothing to the living empire. With Prasutagus gone, Roman officials did not arrive to mourn or to honor his will. They came to collect. A delegation of soldiers and bureaucrats descended upon the Iceni court and declared the king's final wishes utterly invalid. From the Roman perspective, a client king could not bequeath his kingdom. His power had been a temporary loan from Rome, and with his death, that loan was called in. The entire kingdom, its land, its people, and its wealth was now forfeit, the property of Emperor Nero. This was not just a legal technicality, it was a brutal act of political annihilation, a message to every other tribe that their autonomy was a fiction. But the Romans were not finished. They intended to make the lesson unforgettable. To ensure the Iceni could never again claim a leader of their own bloodline, the officials turned their cruelty directly upon the royal family. Queen Boudica, a woman of status and authority, was seized. In a calculated act of supreme humiliation, she was stripped and publicly flogged before her own people. The lashes were not merely physical. Each strike was meant to break her spirit, to shatter the respect her people held for her, and to demonstrate that Roman law was enforced with the whip. Then came an even deeper violation, an act so horrific it was meant to extinguish the royal line itself. Her two young daughters were assaulted by Roman soldiers. The specific historical accounts are stark in their brevity, leaving the full horror to the imagination. This was more than random violence. It was a systematic, symbolic act designed to destroy a family, a lineage, and the very soul of a culture. In a single bloody day, the Romans had taken everything from Boudica. Her husband was dead, her title was stolen, her body was broken, and her children were traumatized. They had taken her past, her present, and her future. In doing so, they made a catastrophic miscalculation. They believed they had crushed a queen. Instead, they had forged a weapon of pure, unyielding rage. From the ashes of her humiliation, a new kind of power was born. The woman who had been broken was gone, replaced by a figure of terrifying resolve. Boudica did not retreat into grief. She turned her pain into a rallying cry, traveling from village to unite the shattered Iceni. Her message was not one of politics, but of raw human justice. She stood before her people, a living testament to Roman treachery, and asked them a simple, devastating question. What do you have left to lose? Her words, as recorded by the Roman historian Tacitus, ring with this fury. "We are British," she declared, "fighting for our lives, our children, and our freedom. Look at the numbers of our forces and the reasons for this war. Let us either win or die." This was not a call for negotiation. It was a declaration of total war. Her very appearance became a weapon. Ancient writers describe her as tall and imposing, with a piercing gaze that seemed to see into a person's soul. Her most famous feature, a great mass of bright, reddish hair, fell to her hips, a wild, untamed banner that defied Roman ideals of order and control. She did not look like a Roman matron. She looked like a force of nature. This was a calculated presentation. She understood the power of symbols, and she transformed herself into the living embodiment of a Celtic war goddess, most likely Andrast, the deity of victory and revenge. When she raised her spear and called upon this goddess in battle, she was no longer just a queen seeking vengeance for a personal wrong. She was a priestess channeling the wrath of her entire people and their gods against the foreign invaders. Her rebellion became a holy war. This divine fury proved irresistibly contagious. The Iceni were joined by their southern neighbors, the Trinovantes, a tribe nursing a deep and bitter grudge of their own. The Romans had not just conquered them, they had desecrated their most sacred space, building a vast temple to the former Emperor Claudius right over their ancestral lands in Camulodunum. For the Trinovantes, this was a spiritual insult as profound as the physical abuse suffered by Boudica. Every Roman stone laid there was a slap in the face to their gods and their ancestors. When Boudica spoke of driving the Romans from Britain, she was speaking their language. Together, these two tribes formed the core of a rebel army that was more than just a collection of warriors. It was a moving city of men, women, and children, a whole people uprooted and on the march, united by a shared dream of freedom and a shared thirst for retribution. Their first target was a symbol of everything they hated, the very city built upon their sacred ground. While Boudica's rage was born from a personal and violent betrayal, the Trinovantes tribe carried a different kind of wound, one that festered in the very soil beneath their feet. Their city, Camulodunum, had once been their proud capital, a center of power and spiritual significance. But the Romans had not merely conquered it, they had systematically erased it. The land of their ancestors was confiscated and given to retired Roman legionaries who built their own colonia, a veterans' colony, right on top of the sacred Trinovantian ground. For these settlers, it was a reward for a lifetime of service. For the native people, it was a daily, visible theft. They were made strangers in their own homeland, watching from the margins as foreigners plowed the fields their families had tended for generations. Yet the ultimate insult was still to come. The Romans decided to construct a massive, gleaming temple dedicated to the deified former Emperor Claudius. This was not just a building, it was a statement carved in stone. It declared that the divine right of a Roman ruler now superseded the ancient gods of Britain. The sheer hypocrisy of the project was breathtaking. The Trinovantes were not only stripped of their land to make room for this monument to their conqueror, they were then forced to pay for its construction and to fund the extravagant priesthood that maintained it. Imagine the psychological toll. Every day they saw this foreign structure looming over their old home, a temple built with their own money and labor to honor the man who had orchestrated their subjugation. It was a spiritual and financial prison, a monument to their own powerlessness. So when Boudica raised her standard, she was not just offering the Trinovantes revenge, she was offering them redemption. Joining her revolt was their only chance to tear down that hated temple and reclaim their gods, their land, and their very identity. The first target for this army of the wronged was a city built upon a sacred wound. Camulodunum stood as the ultimate symbol of Roman arrogance, a veterans' colony planted directly on the grave of Trinovantian pride. For the retired legionaries living there, it was a comfortable retirement, a little piece of Rome transplanted to Britain. They went about their days in a town that was entirely unprepared for war. its streets laid out for commerce, not conflict, its walls little more than a formality. The signs of the coming storm were everywhere if only anyone had cared to look. The locals who knew the land and its whispers reported terrifying omens. The great statue of Victory that overlooked the forum was said to have toppled over for no reason, crashing to the ground as if in despair. Even more chilling were the sounds that echoed from the empty theater at night, phantom screams and the haunting wail of a foreign crowd, as if the city itself were already mourning its own death. The Roman officials dismissed these reports as native superstition, the desperate fantasies of a conquered people. They were fatally, catastrophically wrong. When Boudica's forces finally descended from the surrounding forests, they did not look like an army. They looked like a tidal wave of humanity. Ancient sources described their numbers as uncountable, a vast, seething mass of warriors, their families, and their wagons stretching to the horizon. The rebels swept over the flimsy outer defenses without even slowing down. There were no legions here, only a handful of ill-equipped veterans and local militia. The Britons poured into the undefended streets, their rage focused on every symbol of Roman occupation. They tore down the colonnades, shattered the marble statues, and set the wooden buildings ablaze. The air grew thick with black smoke and the terrible sounds of a city being erased from the earth. The Roman defenders, realizing the hopelessness of their situation, made a desperate final stand inside the one structure the Britons hated most, the massive temple of Claudius. For 2 days, this temple became their fortress, its thick stone walls their only shield against the fury outside. But it was a doomed defense. The Britons, fueled by a decade of spiritual outrage, swarmed the building. They smashed at the doors and windows, scaling the walls with ladders, climbing over the bodies of their own fallen. Finally, they broke through. What happened inside was swift and terrible. The last Romans were slaughtered where they stood, among the altars to the god emperor they had been forced to worship. Then, with a satisfaction that must have felt like divine justice, the rebels set the temple ablaze. The great monument to Claudius, built with Trinovantian money on Trinovantian land, was consumed by a fire so intense that its foundations were cracked and blackened for centuries. The message was clear and unmistakable. No symbol of Roman power was safe. The smoke from Camulogenum was a black stain on the eastern horizon, a signal fire of rebellion that could not be ignored. In the Roman fortress at Lindum, modern-day Lincoln, a commander received the desperate pleas for help. This was Patilius Cerealis, legate of the legendary 9th Legion, the Legio Nona Hispana. He was a man of action, born into a powerful Roman family and married into the imperial line. To him, this native uprising was not a war, it was a riot, an insult to Roman order that needed to be stamped out with immediate, overwhelming force. He assembled a corps of his legion, several thousand of Rome's finest heavy infantry, and set out on a forced march south. His confidence was absolute. He believed his disciplined troops, marching in their perfect formations, would simply scatter the disorganized barbarian horde. He was riding directly into a trap designed specifically for men who thought like him. Boudica's scouts tracked the legion's progress with precision. They knew the Romans would follow the straight, open roads, the very symbols of their control over the land. But the Britons did not fight on Roman terms. They chose their battlefield not in an open field, but in the tangled, ancient forests that still dominated the landscape, a terrain the Romans feared and called Silva Inculta, the uncultivated woods. As Cerealis and his column advanced, likely along the Roman road towards the burning city, the forest on either side of them grew dense and dark. The only sounds were the rhythmic tramp of their own sandaled feet and the clink of their armor. Then, without any warning, the world erupted. A deafening roar erupted from the tree line. Thousands of warriors who had been waiting in absolute silence poured from the woods. They did not form a battle line for a classic Roman engagement. They swarmed the column from all sides, using the trees for cover and breaking the legion's cohesion in moments. The Britons fought with a ferocity born of personal vengeance, targeting the vulnerable flanks of the Roman formation. The legionaries, trained for set-piece battles, found their famous discipline useless in the chaotic close-quarters slaughter. They were cut down where they stood, unable to deploy into their effective fighting squares. The battle was not a fight, it was a massacre. The 9th Legion's infantry, the heart of Cerealis' force, was almost completely wiped out. In a moment of pure panic and desperation, the legate himself was forced to make a choice that would haunt his career. He abandoned his dying men, turning his horse and fleeing with his cavalry escort, fighting his way through the chaos to save his own life. The humiliation was total. A full Roman legion, one of the proudest units in the entire empire, had been ambushed and destroyed by an army it considered a mere mob. The news of this stunning victory would spread like wildfire, proving to every tribe in Britain that the invincible Romans could indeed be beaten. The echoes of the 9th Legion's destruction had not yet faded when a new kind of dread began to creep up the River Thames. It flowed into the bustling trading port of Londinium, a town that was the very opposite of a fortified Roman city. This was a place of commerce, not war, a chaotic jumble of wooden wharves, warehouses, and merchant stalls, all connected by muddy streets. Its wealth was its lifeblood, but it had no walls, no garrison, and no defense. The first refugees from the east brought the terrible news, their faces etched with a panic that was instantly contagious. The governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, arrived with a small, fast-moving cavalry unit, hoping to find a place he could defend. What he found was a trap in the making. He saw the open streets, the terrified civilians, and the certain knowledge that Boudica's immense army was days, perhaps only hours away. His own main force was still marching to join him. He was faced with an impossible, soul-crushing decision. He could order his outnumbered troops to make a heroic but utterly futile last stand, sacrificing the only professional army left in the province to defend a town that was militarily indefensible. Or he could make a ruthless calculation for the survival of Rome itself in Britain. He chose the army. The order was given to abandon Londinium to its fate. We can only imagine the scenes of pure despair as the Roman cavalry rode away, leaving the citizens to a terrifying uncertainty. Some fled into the surrounding marshes, but many, too poor or too slow to escape, were left behind. When the rebel army arrived, they showed no mercy. Londinium was not just sacked, it was systematically erased. Every wooden building was set ablaze, the fire so intense that it created a permanent scar in the earth. Modern archaeologists digging deep beneath the City of London find a distinct, thick layer of red, oxidized debris, a silent, vivid testament to that day of fire and blood. This is not just dirt, it is the physical evidence of an inferno, the scorched remains of an entire town and the people who could not escape. The rebels left nothing but smoldering ruins, sending another unmistakable message to Rome. Your wealth, your trade, your entire economic machine on this island, it all burns just the same. The flames of Londinium had barely cooled when the rebel horde turned northwest, its fury undiminished. Their third target was not a Roman colony, but a city called Verulamium. This place represented a different, and in some ways more insidious, kind of enemy. Verulamium was a municipium, a status granted to a town whose local elite had fully embraced Roman culture. Its population was largely British, but these were Britons who had chosen collaboration over resistance. They had taken Roman names, worn Roman clothes, and built Roman-style villas. They had traded their ancestral traditions for a seat at the conqueror's table. To Boudica and her followers, Verulamium was a symbol of cultural betrayal. It was proof that Rome did not just conquer with swords, but with the slow, seductive poison of assimilation. Attacking this city was a declaration that there would be no middle ground in this war. You were either for Britain or you were for Rome. When the army descended, they showed no distinction between Roman and Romanized Britain. The city, prosperous and undefended, was consumed just as completely as the others. Its forum, its shops, and the fine homes of its collaborating elite were all put to the torch. The destruction was so thorough that archaeologists can again trace it in a layer of burned debris, a silent grave for a community that had tried to find a peaceful path. This was the final, terrifying proof of the rebellion's total nature. It was not merely a war against foreign soldiers, but a crusade against any and all forms of Roman influence. The province was now gripped by a palpable, spreading terror. The Roman administration had effectively ceased to exist south of the military frontier. 3 major settlements were smoldering ruins, and a veteran legion had been annihilated. For the Romans still in Britain, the unthinkable was happening. The entire edifice of their control was collapsing in a storm of fire and vengeance, and the architect of this apocalypse seemed utterly unstoppable. While Boudica's firestorm raged across the south, a very different kind of mind was at work. The Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was not a man prone to panic. He was a seasoned, ruthless professional, fresh from one of the most brutal campaigns in recent memory. Just before the rebellion erupted, he had led his legions to the far western island of Mona, the Druidic stronghold of Anglesey. His mission there was not just military but cultural annihilation. He destroyed the sacred groves and slaughtered the Druids, the spiritual heart of British resistance, understanding that to conquer a people you must first break their soul. This was a commander who thought in terms of total war, and he now faced a rebellion that threatened to undo everything. As Boudica's army burned Verulamium, Suetonius was not idly watching the smoke signals. He was executing a cold, calculated plan. He had made the agonizing decision to sacrifice 3 entire cities, not out of cowardice, but to buy the one thing he desperately needed: time. He was racing north, gathering every soldier he could find. His core force was the 14th Legion, the Gemina, a tough, veteran unit known for its discipline. He merged them with detachments from the 20th Legion, the Valeria Victrix, and every available auxiliary troop, the foreign specialists who provided the Roman army with its cavalry and skirmishers. This was not a random mob, but a honed instrument of about 10,000 professional soldiers. His next decision was his most critical. He would not let Boudica choose the battlefield again, as she had with the 9th Legion. He began searching for the perfect piece of ground, a place where the sheer size of the British horde would become its greatest weakness. He needed a bottleneck, a killing field that would turn her numbers into a liability. The fate of Roman Britain now rested on the terrain one man could find. The 2 armies, one born of fire and the other of ice, now moved toward their final, decisive confrontation. Boudica's force was a nation on the move, a sprawling multitude that stretched for miles across the countryside. Ancient historians described their numbers as vastly exceeding the Romans, perhaps even more than 200,000 souls. But this was not a traditional army. It was a chaotic migration of warriors, their wives, children, and elders, all traveling in thousands of wagons that formed a vast, mobile supply train. They lived directly off the land, foraging and feasting as they went, their confidence soaring with every victory. Their strength was in their sheer, overwhelming mass and the raw, emotional fury that drove them forward. Yet this was also their greatest weakness. They were a multitude, not a military unit. There was no centralized command, no standardized equipment, and no disciplined formation. They fought as individual tribes and clans, a storm of passionate but uncoordinated bravery. In stark contrast, the Roman force under Suetonius Paulinus was a masterpiece of controlled violence. He had found his perfect battlefield, a narrow defile with a dense forest at its back and steep, protective slopes on its flanks. His 10,000 men were not a crowd, but a single, living organism. They were heavy infantry professionals, armed with identical short swords, large rectangular shields, and throwing javelins. They moved and fought as one, their discipline a form of faith. While the Britons relied on the land for food, The Romans carried their supplies with them, a logistical feat that gave them consistency but also made them vulnerable if their supply lines were cut. The governor understood he was outnumbered by perhaps 20 to 1, but he also knew that in the narrow space he had chosen, those numbers would be useless. The British horde would be forced to funnel into a killing zone where their greatest asset would become a crippling liability. On the eve of battle, both leaders understood that the final weapon was not the sword but the human spirit. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Boudica rode in her chariot with her daughters before her, moving down the lines of her gathered tribes. She did not speak of tactics or formations. She spoke of freedom. She reminded them of the injustices they had suffered, the lash on her own back, the violation of her children. She declared that she, a woman, was resolved to win or die, and asked if the men fighting with her were prepared to do the same. Her speech was a raw, powerful invocation of their shared pain and their sacred cause, designed to inflame their hearts to a fever pitch. Suetonius Paulinus, facing his own nervous troops, took the opposite approach. He appealed not to their passion but to their professionalism and their pride. He dismissed the enemy as a loud, disorganized rabble, more numerous in women and camp followers than real soldiers. He pointed out that the Britons had no armor, no strategy, and would break upon the unyielding wall of Roman discipline. He told his legionaries to ignore the noise and focus on their training, to keep their formation, and to strike with cold efficiency. His message was one of calm contempt, a calculated effort to replace fear with arrogant confidence. As the sun set, the two armies, embodying two entirely different philosophies of war, settled in for a night of restless anticipation. The fate of a province would be decided not by numbers, but by which spirit proved stronger, the fire of vengeance or the ice of discipline. The morning mist clung to a narrow valley, a place whose name has been lost to time. This is the great puzzle of Boudica's last stand, a historical mystery buried under 2,000 years of English soil. The Roman historian Tacitus gives us the crucial clues. He tells us Governor Suetonius Paulinus chose a position with a wooded defile at his back and protected flanks, a narrow field that would force the massive British army to attack his front in a confined space. But Tacitus never gives us the name. He simply wrote that it was a location of the governor's choosing, leaving modern historians and archaeologists to play a grand game of detective across the British countryside. The search for this lost battlefield is a captivating fusion of ancient text and modern science, where every theory is a compelling argument built on topography, tactics, and tantalizing fragments of evidence. One of the strongest candidates lies in the Midlands, near the village of Manchester in Warwickshire. Here, the topography fits Tacitus's description remarkably well. The Roman wattling street runs through a natural corridor with high ground on one side that would have protected a Roman flank. The name Manchester itself is thought to derive from the Latin for field of the chariots, a hauntingly appropriate title for a battle against Boudica. While no definitive proof like a mass grave has been found, the strategic logic is powerful. It was a place Suetonius, retreating from the south, could have reached and fortified in time. Another compelling theory points to Church Stow in Northamptonshire. Here, the landscape offers a perfect natural amphitheater, a bowl-shaped area where the British horde could have gathered on the slopes, only to be funneled into a death trap at the bottom. Proponents of this site point to archaeological surveys that have revealed unusual Iron Age and Roman activity in the area, though a smoking gun remains elusive. Other locations have their champions too, from the rolling hills near Towcester to spots along the ancient Iceni Way. Each theory is a meticulous reconstruction, an attempt to match the silent witness of the land with the few words written by a Roman senator. The search continues, a testament to the enduring power of this single day. It reminds us that history is not always written in stone, but is often hidden just beneath our feet, waiting for the right clue to bring a forgotten field of battle back to life. The sun rose on a landscape transformed into a killing ground. Suetonius Paulinus had positioned his 10,000 legionaries in a tight, three-line formation across the mouth of a narrow defile. Behind them was a dense, impassable wood, and on their flanks the ground rose steeply, making a cavalry charge impossible. This brilliant tactical choice forced the immense British army to funnel into a front no wider than the Roman line itself. Boudica's vast host, for all its numbers, could only engage a fraction of its force at a time. The rest were packed together in a seething, noisy mass behind them, their own size becoming a prison. The battle began not with a clash of swords, but with a storm of missiles. The Britons, confident in their overwhelming numbers, let loose a haphazard cloud of light javelins and sling stones. Many of these projectiles rattled harmlessly off the raised Roman shields, the interlocked scuta forming an almost impenetrable wall of wood and leather. Then came the Roman reply, a moment of chilling mechanical precision. On command, the front ranks of legionaries took one step forward and hurled their pila. These were not mere javelins. Each pilum was a heavy throwing spear with a long, thin iron shank designed to punch through a shield and bend on impact, making the shield useless and often pinning the wounded bearer to his own defense. The effect was devastating. The volley scythed into the packed British ranks, not just killing warriors but disarming and disabling dozens more in a single, brutal stroke. As chaos erupted in the British front lines, the Roman horn sounded a new command. The disciplined ranks suddenly shifted, the front line coalescing into a series of sharp, triangular wedges. This was the classic Roman tactic, the porcupine's quill becoming a spearhead. These wedges, led by the most experienced centurions, then surged forward into the disorganized British charge. The Britons fought with incredible personal courage, but they were individual heroes colliding with a single, unified machine. They found no gaps in the Roman line, only a relentless, stabbing wall of shields and short swords. The legionaries did not waste energy on wild swings. They held their formation, using the heavy boss of their shield to bash an opponent off balance, then delivering a single, brutal thrust with the gladius into the exposed torso. The battle degenerated into a grim, industrial slaughter. The Britons, packed so tightly they could barely raise their arms, were methodically cut down. Their very numbers, the source of their confidence, now trapped them. The field became a churning nightmare of fallen bodies and panicking warriors, their mobility gone, their battle cries turning to screams of terror. The Roman advance was slow, relentless, and utterly merciless, a demonstration of how cold discipline could systematically dismantle the most fiery rage. The narrow defile became a slaughterhouse. In the suffocating press of bodies, the Roman gladius was the perfect weapon. This short, double-edged sword was not for elegant dueling. It was a brutal tool for stabbing and thrusting, designed to be used in tight formation where there was no room to swing a long blade. As the British warriors pushed forward, their own momentum trapped them. They were packed so closely that a man who fell was immediately trampled, and those behind could not even see the carnage ahead. The legionaries worked with a grim, mechanical rhythm. They would punch forward with the heavy boss of their shield, creating a tiny gap of space, and then drive the gladius into an exposed belly or throat. Each stab was short, efficient, and lethal. The initial British fury, so potent in the open field, shattered against this unyielding, stabbing wall. Their attack lost all momentum, their numbers now a curse rather than a blessing. Panic began to ripple backward through the horde, a contagion more deadly than any Roman sword. Then came the final, tragic twist of the trap. The Britons had brought their entire world with them, a vast train of wagons containing their families, their children, and their possessions. They had parked these wagons at the edge of the battlefield, a symbol of their nomadic crusade and a place they believed was safe. But as the Roman advance began to push the wavering British line backward, these wagons became a prison. The retreating warriors found their escape routes blocked by their own homes. They were caught between the relentless, advancing Romans and an impassable tangle of carts, animals, and terrified civilians. The orderly Roman advance transformed into a rout. The legionaries, sensing the breaking point, pushed forward with renewed force, their discipline giving way to a vengeful fury of their own. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. The Britons were cut down as they tried to flee, trapped against the very wagons meant to protect them. The air grew thick with the screams of the dying and the desperate, a horrifying echo of the vengeance Boudica had once unleashed upon the Romans. In a single, brutal afternoon, the fire of rebellion was extinguished not by a hero, but by the cold, hard logic of a choke point and a short, stabbing sword. The silence that fell over the field was a sound in itself, broken only by the moans of the dying and the calls of scavenging birds. The scale of the slaughter was beyond comprehension. Ancient historians, writing for a Roman audience, recorded numbers that are staggering to this day. They claimed that 80,000 Britons lay dead on that field, while Suetonius Paulinus lost only 400 of his own men. These figures are almost certainly an exaggeration, a common propaganda tool to magnify a general's glory. Yet even if the true number was half or a quarter of that total, the reality was a massacre of historic proportions. The narrowness of the Roman position had turned their tactical advantage into a butcher's yard. The Britons, trapped by their own numbers and their encircling wagons, had been given no quarter. The disciplined Roman advance had not been about taking prisoners, but about exterminating a threat. When the fighting was done, the ground was not visible for the fallen. It was a landscape of the dead, a field of broken shields, abandoned chariots, and countless bodies, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the legionary sword. But the killing was not over. A Roman victory was never complete without a final, grim act of consolidation. The legions would have spent the following days hunting down survivors who had managed to flee the main carnage. Any warrior found hiding in the woods or marshes was cut down without mercy. The families who had traveled with the army, now utterly defenseless, were either slaughtered or enslaved, their fate a bleak commodity in the empire's economy. This systematic mopping-up operation was as much a part of the Roman military doctrine as the battle itself. It was designed to shatter the rebellion's spirit so completely that no thought of rising up would ever cross the minds of the survivors for generations to come. In that, they succeeded. The dream of a free Britain, so vividly alive just days before, was now just another corpse on a field no one would ever name. But what of the Queen herself, the woman who had set a province ablaze? In the grim aftermath of the battle, Boudica simply vanished from the historical record, leaving behind one of history's most haunting questions. The Roman historians who provide our only accounts give us two different endings, both stark and final. Tacitus, writing a generation later, states that she took poison, a final act of defiance to cheat the Romans of the ultimate prize, her capture and a humiliating parade through the streets of their capital. For a warrior queen, this was a final assertion of control, choosing her own end over the chains of her enemy. Decades later, the historian Cassius Dio offered a different, more prosaic version. He wrote that she fell sick and died, her body and spirit simply broken by the catastrophic defeat. One account speaks to a conscious choice, the other to a tragic surrender to fate. Yet both stories lead to the same place. Her body was never paraded, never displayed. It was never found. This absence of a corpse is the seed from which legends grow. Without a body, there was no definitive proof of her death. In the hearts of her people, could she not have simply faded back into the misty forests from which she came? The idea of a sleeping warrior queen waiting for the hour of Britain's greatest need was born in this historical silence. Whether by her own hand or a fever, her physical death marked the absolute end of the rebellion. She was the living soul of the uprising, its fiery spirit made flesh. With her gone, the heart went out of the resistance. The disparate tribes, united only by her charisma and their shared rage, had no one to rally around. The rebellion did not just lose a battle, it lost its reason for being. Her death, however it happened, was the final, symbolic extinguishing of the flame. Rome's victory on that nameless field was only the beginning of the reckoning. The legions, their discipline hardened by fury, now turned from open battle to a systematic campaign of terror. Fresh reinforcements arrived from the continent, thousands of new legionaries marching into a land already broken, their sole purpose to ensure no spark of rebellion could ever flicker again. This was not war, it was pacification, a grim process designed to grind a people into absolute submission. Roman justice was methodical and ruthless. Soldiers swept through the territories of the rebellious tribes, their actions sanctioned by a state that believed mercy was a sign of weakness. Villages suspected of supporting the revolt were put to the torch. Any chieftain or warrior who had fought beside Boudica was hunted down and executed, a public lesson in the cost of defiance. The land itself was stripped of its wealth, with Roman requisitions taking what little food and livestock remained. The political autonomy the Iceni and Trinovantes had once cherished was erased completely. Their lands were formally annexed, absorbed directly into the Roman province, and placed under the permanent, watchful eye of a military governor. The client kingdom was dead, replaced by the unyielding rule of a provincial bureaucracy. Yet perhaps the cruelest blow was one the Romans did not even have to deliver. In their righteous fury, the Britons had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had neglected to plant their crops, believing the war would be short and their victory total. They had bet everything on their freedom and they had lost. Now, with the granaries empty and the fields barren, a terrible famine began to stalk the land. It was a silent, creeping enemy that the Roman sword could not fight. The very people who had feasted before battle now starved in the aftermath, their bodies weakened, their spirits broken by a hunger they had brought upon themselves. The dream of driving Rome into the sea was now replaced by the desperate, daily struggle to find a single meal. The cost of their failed gamble was measured not just in the dead on the battlefield, but in the hollow eyes of the survivors, a people conquered by both the sword and the empty silence of their own fields. The story of Boudica's rebellion comes to us from the hands of her enemies. We have no letters from the queen herself, no songs sung by her warriors around the fire, no Celtic chronicles that survived the Roman conquest. Our entire understanding of this earth-shattering conflict is built on two pillars, both Roman and both written decades after the ashes had cooled. The first and most crucial source is Publius Cornelius Tacitus. His account is our most detailed narrative, and it carries a unique and fascinating connection to the events. His father-in-law, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, served as a military tribune in Britain during this very period. Agricola might have witnessed the rebellion's aftermath firsthand, perhaps even spoken with soldiers who fought in the final battle. This gives Tacitus a potential link to living memory, a thread back to the real events. Yet this connection also creates a powerful bias. Tacitus was writing to glorify his father-in-law's career and to critique the corruption of earlier Roman emperors like Nero. His portrayal of Boudica is surprisingly sympathetic, but his aim was not to celebrate her. It was to use her story as a moral lesson, to show how Roman misrule and greed could create a monster of their own making. His account is a masterpiece of historical drama, but we must always read it with the knowledge that his pen was guided by a very Roman agenda. Our second major source is Cassius Dio, a Greek historian writing more than a century after the rebellion. His account is far more sensational. He provides vivid, almost cinematic details, like his famous description of Boudica as a towering figure with a fierce gaze and a mass of fiery hair. But Dio was composing his history from a great distance, both in time and space. He had no personal connections to Britain, and his work is filled with the kind of embellishments that make for a gripping story but muddy the historical waters. He amplifies the numbers, heightens the drama, and paints Boudica in broader, more archetypal strokes. Reading these two accounts side by side is like looking at the same event through two different lenses. One is a political polemic with a direct line to the participants, the other a dramatic epic written for a distant audience. Both are viewing the Celtic world from the outside, through the unshakable conviction of Roman superiority. The true voice of Boudica and her people is a silence we can never fill, a story forever told by the hands that sought to erase it. For nearly 2,000 years, Boudica's story lay dormant, a forgotten ember in the soil of a conquered land. Then, in the 19th century, that ember was fanned into a blazing national symbol. The reign of Queen Victoria created a powerful cultural appetite for heroic female figures from Britain's own ancient past. A queen on the throne demanded a queen from history, and Boudica was resurrected to fulfill that role. The most spectacular expression of this Victorian revival was a monumental bronze statue conceived by the sculptor Thomas Thornycroft. He envisioned the warrior queen in her chariot, her arm raised in defiance, her daughters clinging behind her, charging into an eternal battle. This was not the vengeful barbarian of Roman histories, but a noble matriarch defending her homeland. The project became a passion for Thornycroft, who worked on it for decades, but it was not completed until after his death. The finished sculpture, a massive and dramatic piece, was finally placed on a plinth near the Houses of Parliament and Westminster Bridge. Its location was profoundly symbolic, positioning this ancient rebel literally at the doorstep of British political power. The statue's inscription leaves no doubt about its intended message, identifying her as Boudica, Queen of the Iceni, who died in the year 61 after leading her people against the Roman invader. This iconic image, frozen in metal, permanently reshaped her legacy. The complex, tragic leader of a failed rebellion was smoothed into a simpler, more inspiring figure, a timeless emblem of British resilience and the fight for freedom. She was no longer a specific historical person, but an idea, a national myth cast in bronze for a nation building its own imperial identity. That bronze statue near Parliament is only one version of the Queen. The legend of Boudica did not remain frozen in metal, but began a new life in the modern imagination, constantly reborn in novels, television series, and films. Each generation seems to find in her story a mirror for its own struggles and values. In the pages of historical fiction, she has been portrayed in wildly different lights. Some authors depict her as a near-mythic figure, a priestess channeling the raw power of the old gods, her rebellion a spiritual war against a soulless empire. Others ground her in gritty realism, focusing on her role as a mother and a widow, her fury stemming from a deeply personal human trauma. The same divergence plays out on screen. A television miniseries might present her as a noble freedom fighter, a majestic and tragic leader whose struggle echoes 20th century wars of independence. Yet another film could lean into the Roman perspective found in Cassius Dio, portraying her as a bloodthirsty savage, leading a horde of screaming barbarians in an orgy of destruction. These are not historical inaccuracies so much as they are cultural conversations. A post-war adaptation might emphasize the horrors of conflict and the price of vengeance, while a production made during a period of national identity crisis might highlight her as a unifying symbol against a foreign threat. The true power of Boudica's story lies in its flexibility. She is a blank canvas upon which we project our own definitions of justice, resistance, and the limits of power. She can be a feminist icon, a nationalist hero, or a cautionary tale about the cycles of violence. The endless reinterpretation of her life proves one thing. The rebellion did not end on a lost battlefield. It continues every time someone discovers her name and asks the timeless question she embodies: when is defiance not just justified but necessary? The written accounts of Tacitus and Dio tell one story, but the earth beneath our feet tells another. For centuries, the rebellion of Boudica was a tale confined to dusty manuscripts until archaeologists began to peel back the layers of modern cities and uncover its brutal physical truth. The most dramatic evidence comes from 3 distinct scorched scars in the ground, silent witnesses to the path of destruction. In Colchester, the modern name for Camulogenum, excavations reveal a thick, red layer of burnt clay and debris, a permanent stain from the fire that consumed the temple of Claudius. London holds an even more famous marker, known universally as the Boudican burnt layer. Deep below the financial district, this stratum of red oxidized soil, fused pottery, and charcoal is a snapshot of an entire town incinerated in a single, furious day. In St. Albans' ancient Verulamium, the same pattern emerges, a blackened line separating the prosperous Romanized town from the bleak silence that followed. These are not just layers of dirt, they are the archaeological echoes of an inferno, confirming the historical narrative with chilling precision. Beyond the ash, other discoveries speak to the human terror of that time. Hordes of coins buried in panic and never recovered are like frozen moments of fear. A notable hoard found in Colchester contained coins of the Iceni, carefully hidden away as the rebel army approached, their owner presumably killed or enslaved before they could return. These caches are poignant time capsules representing a family's entire savings, sacrificed in a desperate bid for a future that never came. The search for the final battlefield itself is archaeology's greatest puzzle. While no mass grave has been definitively linked to the conflict, surveys at candidate sites like Manchester have turned up fragments of Roman military equipment and sling bullets, tantalizing clues scattered across the English countryside. Each small find adds another piece to the puzzle. Modern archaeologists act as detectives, using tools like ground-penetrating radar and soil chemistry analysis to read the landscape in ways Tacitus never could. Their work does more than just confirm the ancient texts, it often challenges them. The Roman historians wrote of 80,000 Britons slain, a number that seems impossibly high. By studying the capacity of the suspected battlefields and the logistics of ancient armies, archaeologists can provide a more realistic, if no less horrifying, estimate of the carnage. They shift the focus from grand numbers to individual lives, analyzing the bones found in the destruction layers to understand not just how people died, but how they lived in the moments before the revolt. This scientific perspective adds a profound depth to the story, moving it from epic legend to a tangible human tragedy. The fusion of ancient text and modern trowel has given Boudica's rebellion a physical reality, proving that some fires burn so hot their mark is left on the world for millennia. So we are left with 2 distinct figures, the historical queen and the legendary heroine. The real Boudica is a woman we can only see through a dense fog, her outline sharp in some places and utterly blurred in others. The facts that form the solid core of her story are few but powerful. We know she was the widow of Prasutagus, a client king of the Iceni. We know that after his death, Roman officials brutally seized her kingdom, flogged her, and assaulted her daughters. This specific sequence of events triggered a massive rebellion that united at least 2 major tribes. We know her forces annihilated the 9th Legion and systematically razed 3 major settlements to the ground. And we know that her revolt ended in a final, decisive battle where a Roman army under Suetonius Paulinus crushed her forces, after which she died. These are the undeniable pillars of the story, confirmed by archaeology and the historical record. Everything else is a matter of interpretation and legend. Her fiery red hair, her towering stature, her stirring speeches, these are all vivid details provided by Roman historians writing for dramatic effect. We have no idea what she truly looked like or the exact words she used to rally her people. The speeches recorded by Tacitus are brilliant pieces of political writing, but they are his literary creations placed in her mouth to illustrate a theme. Even the scale of her rebellion is hotly debated. Did she truly command an army of 200,000, or is that a Roman exaggeration designed to make their eventual victory seem even more glorious? Her motivations are another puzzle. Was she solely driven by personal vengeance, or was she a strategic leader with a genuine vision for an independent Britain? The Roman sources emphasize the personal insult, the lash and the violation, because that was a motive their readers could understand. It frames her as a wronged individual rather than a legitimate political opponent. But to unite multiple tribes for a coordinated campaign suggests a deeper political acumen. Perhaps the personal and the political were inseparable, the violence against her family becoming the perfect symbol for the violence Rome inflicted upon all the tribes. The real Boudica exists in that space between the personal grievance and the national crusade. She is both the grieving mother and the calculating warlord, the figurehead and the strategist. We can never fully know her, and perhaps that is why her story endures. She is not a statue, but a shadow on the landscape, a permanent question about the price of empire and the fiery, unknowable heart of defiance itself. Her rebellion was a firestorm that blazed across the land and was extinguished in a single, brutal afternoon. From the personal violation of a queen to the spiritual desecration of a tribe, the revolt revealed the brutal mechanics of empire and the terrifying power of a united people pushed beyond all endurance. Boudica's legacy, however, did not die with her on that lost battlefield. It transformed. She became an eternal symbol of defiance, a name invoked whenever a people stand against an overwhelming power. Her story asks us uncomfortable questions about justice, vengeance, and the true cost of freedom. The Romans saw a savage destroyer, but history has often painted a heroic freedom fighter. The most profound truth may lie in the space between. She was a product of a brutal age, a mother and a queen who channeled a world's rage into a war that nearly changed history. Her legend endures not because she won, but because she dared to fight at all. It reminds us that the price of liberty is often measured in fire and blood. So what do you see when you hear her name? A savage or a hero, or a complex human being forged in the crucible of oppression? Share your thoughts on Boudica in the comments below, and join us next time for another journey into sleepy history.